Da vidimo i drugi deo intervjua, pa nastavimo.
NATO is the sole reason why this conflict is taking place. Now, why does NATO continue to exist? NATO brings relevance to Europe in the story. Europe is nothing without NATO. Think about it. Europe after World War II, the British and the French watched their empires crumble, watched their nations sink into relative obscurity. Germany was divided, weakened. The only way Europe became relevant was not rather than as individual nations, was a collective economically through the European Union and a collective militarily through NATO. But the NATO alliance is 100% dependent upon the United States, 100%. You remove the United States from the NATO equation, there is no NATO. You can remove any 1, 2, or 3 of the current membership from the alliance, and NATO could still exist as long as the United States stays in. It's the American role, the American presence that gives NATO a credibility. So why does America stay in NATO? Because it's expensive. America stays in NATO because NATO is nothing but an extension of American national security policy, American policy. NATO is not about European security. NATO is about American security. That's all it's about. Now, when the Warsaw Pact collapsed, Europe was able to convince the United States about 2 things. One, that the instability that happened with the dissolution of Yugoslavia is a threat to European security, and that the only vehicle available to do this threat was NATO. So you can't disband NATO. NATO was needed to provide European security, which is American security, in Yugoslavia. And that there was the potential as Eastern Europe freed itself from Russia for Yugoslavia-type instability. Therefore, it's necessary to expand NATO to the east to bring these former Warsaw Pact nations into NATO so that you could be secured from the kind of instability that was witnessed with the dissolution of Yugoslavia. So NATO, the United States, NATO bought into this. That's what they did. The problem is in bringing in Eastern Europe, you bring a lot of anti-Russian prejudice. Poland and the Baltic states don't care about Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, what's going on in the Balkans. They care only about Russia and potential posed by Russia, and it's in their interest to have a weakened Russia. So NATO had to have an enemy. Russia becomes the enemy, and that's why NATO exists to this day. NATO, before Russia became enemy number 1, we saw this defensive alliance do a couple things. One, we saw them go to war against Serbia. That's not a defensive alliance. It was an offensive act, illegal, void of any justification under international law, but NATO is a law unto itself. We saw NATO get involved in Iraq, the training effort post-invasion. We saw NATO get involved in Afghanistan. How is that related to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? We saw NATO intervene and change activity in Libya. And now we see NATO talking about expanding into the Pacific. NATO is an organization that has to have conflict to survive. I mean, it's like a vampire needs blood. NATO needs war. And that's just the reality of it. That said, NATO is a full force in the world that needs to drive a stake through its heart, like get rid of a vampire. Hopefully that will happen. I don't believe NATO is going to survive much longer. I think Europe is collapsing. I think NATO has been exposed as a paper tiger. I think Europeans are going to be more concerned about how they heat their homes and feed their families than how they help already build €100 billion army to march east. I don't know what people think when they hear that, but I can't imagine anything good about having Germany reorient to the east, and start marching against Russia. It worked in the past, it ain't worked today. Well, the first thing I would ask Jan Stoltenberg is, before you talk about expanding to 300,000, try mobilizing the 40,000 you claim you have right now. Just try it. You can't, because they don't exist. They're there on paper, but there's nothing rapid about the way they'd be mobilized, and many nations would not be able to meet their obligation. To meet the 300,000 benchmark, I'll give you an example. Stoltenberg said that right now NATO has 4 reinforced battalion-sized battle groups deployed in Poland and the 3 Baltic nations. He said these would be expanded to brigade size. That took the nations that are involved by surprise. I would say that the British were shocked to find out that they are now going to be called upon to provide a brigade to deploy to Estonia. They barely were able to get a battalion deployed to Estonia, and now they're supposed to come up with a brigade. At the same time, they're shrinking their military from 82,000 to 72,000. They don't have the troops to do it. They don't have the capability to do it. The Germans had to cannibalize their entire armored force, the 1 reinforced battalion that it's deployed in Lithuania. How are the Germans going to create a brigade when they don't have the force structure to do that? When their equipment has been poorly maintained? And we can just go on and on and on and on. The United States put a 5th Corps headquarters in Poland. A corps is at least 2 divisions. The United States can barely generate 1 division of troops in Europe, and we're not able to sustain that force logistically, operationally. So Stoltenberg basically it reminded me, there's a movie called Downfall. I don't know if you've seen it, where it's about the final moments of Hitler in the bunker during the Battle of Berlin. And he was there with the map and his generals, and he's shouting, "Where is Wayne? Where is Steiner?" And he's moving armies with his hands and arrows and all. That's Stoltenberg. He's got a nice little map, and he's building 300,000 man armies that don't exist and will never exist. So before beginning the special military operation, Russian military industry began switching over to wartime production rates of the kind of ammunition that they're going to be needing. A lot of people said early on that Russia will run out of ammunition. Russia's not running out of ammunition. The Ukraine's going to run out of men before Russia runs out of ammunition. But here's the thing about NATO. NATO right now is stripping the country bare for Ukraine. They're giving away, first of all, there is no more Soviet-era ammunition in NATO. All those Warsaw Pact nations that used to have the Soviet artillery and the Soviet weaponry, they've given all the ammunition to Ukraine. There's nothing left. So that means that Ukraine's military, which was armed primarily Russian or Soviet-era weapons, they don't have any ammunition left for their artillery. They're totally dependent now on Western artillery. Where's that stuff coming from? Because the West didn't have giant stockpiles of guns sitting in reserve. The West is robbing Peter to pay Paul. Look at the French. They're giving away their own Caesar self-built howitzers supplying Ukraine. The United States is giving Ukraine artillery pieces that are meant for the United States Marine Corps. We're giving them HIMARS systems that are meant for the United States Army. Not only are we giving them the weapon systems, we're giving them the ammunition. In doing so, we're stripping bare our ability to sustain our military in a fight. We've given Ukraine 1/3 of the total number of HIMARS rockets produced in the United States. That means if we go to war, we won't have enough. We'll start a war with Russia, let's say. 2 weeks later, we're out of ammunition. Well, the Russians aren't going to run out of ammunition. And I don't know, what people think happens when 2 armies get involved in a conflict that's primarily artillery-based, and one side runs out of artillery ammunition. The side that has lots of guns and lots of ammunition ends to win. This is what I mean by NATO is a paper tiger. NATO has lost the ability to sustain large-scale ground combat in Europe. They don't have the logistics ability, but they also don't have the operational ability.
Evo, čuli smo Scotta Rittera, ponovit ću intervju koji je dao ekskluzivno za aktuelnosti. Puštat ćemo i ovih dana delove intervjua. Ono što je ovde rekao, između ostalog, što je interesantno, rekao je da NATO nije zainteresovan za bezbednost Evrope, već za sopstvenu bezbednost. A ovdje uporedio je odnos snaga NATO-Rusija.
Mislim da je u ovoj intervju, i tu gospodinu Paviću zahvaljujem, jedna neverovatna otrežnjujuća priča. Naravno, Rittera možete vidjeti i na YouTube nekim izjavama koje je davao tamo gdje ga ne ukinu, ali je zanimljivo, jedna nacionalna televizija kakva je TV Happy, milionskom auditorijumu Srbije sada pokazuje sliku tome šta je stvarno taj zmaj od papira. Sada mi je jasno zašto američka ambasada ima problem sa vašom frekvencijom. Ali da vam kažem, ovo je nevjerojatna stvar. Zašto? Otrežnjujuće izgleda. Zato što mi u stvari shvatamo da u njihovom avionu kao da nema pilota. Znači, tu je dekadencija koja je odlika zapada, političkog zapada već decenijama, doživjela svoj vrhunac kada je dobila jednu klasu političara koji u stvari nisu ni stručne ljude pitali za sve ove genijalne operacije koje su sprovodili i oni sad, pored svih ovih problema koje imaju u Ukrajini, oni sad kreću da provociraju Kinu. Znači, ako je tačno ovo što Ritter govori, oni će imati problem u samoj operaciji u Ukrajini i što duže bude trajala, a trajaće, imaće problem da održe sistem bezbednosti i stabilnosti u Evropi preko NATO-a i svega ostalog, a s druge strane, preko AUKUS-a i sličnih arhitektura bezbednosti na istoku, u Aziji, oni u stvari provociraju još jednog ozbiljnog vojnog džina da se sa njima pozabavi, da im napravi problem. Ima još jedna tu stvar. Pored ove jedne komunikacije koja je na prvu loptu i prvu ruku, gospodin Ritter je predstavnik one Amerike koja bar u polovini američkog stanovništva je obespravljena, frustrirana i pokradena na posljednjim izborima. Znači, postoji teorija da se cijela ova priča o sukobu u svetu radi da bi se atmosfera građanskog rata u Americi sprečila. Mi na neki način dolazimo u onu poziciju koju je pokojni Željko Cvijanović govorio da se ovdje ne radi ni o hladnom ratu, još uvijek, hvala Bogu, ne o svetskom ratu, već se radi o svetskom građanskom ratu. Da mi u stvari na raznim tačkama, ljudi koji imaju potpuno različite idejne pozicije po pitanju kako žele da vide svet, društveno uređenje, ali koji hoće da se pitaju kao ljudi kako treba da žive i da se njihovi narodi to pitaju, svi ti ljudi, bez obzira na svoje idejne razlike, postaju deo jednog velikog globalnog fronta u borbi protiv ovih koji se igraju sa tuđim životima, koji se igraju sa vojskama koji nemaju, koji u stvari se ponašaju kao neko ko nije završio osnovne kurseve bezbednosti, a preuzeo je da upravlja globalnim sistemima. Tako da kad to pogledamo, jedna stvar koja je vrlo zabrinjavajuća u svemu ovome jeste da je jednoj nesposobnoj eliti u rukama ogromno oruđe za razaranje planete. I to je kao u filmu Underground kada pokojni glumac Bora Todorović kaže ljudi, majmun je ušao u tenak. Ja se plašim toga da je neki majmun ušao u tenak i da svašta može da se desi, a da je potrebno da što pre ljudi poput Rittera i ljudi koji su u Americi i ljudi koji još uvijek misle svojom glavom u Evropi izvuku tog majmuna iz tenka i spreče da se desi mnogo veća katastrofa.
Evo, samo da dodam, Douglas McGregor, on je trebao da bude sledeći američki ambasador u Nemačkoj, da je pobedio Trump. I on je već bio, on je angažovan bio kao savjetnik Trumpov i to, on je ista vrsta čoveka kao što je Ritter. Znači to i vidi se kako on ima jedan zdrav rezon. Isto. Znači, u hladnom ratu mi smo antikomunisti, mi smo za slobodni svet. Posle toga, šta će nam NATO? Znači, takvi ljudi treba da se čuju. I upravo obojice su to rekli u raznim intervjuima da je Ritter, pogotovo da je Trump ponovo izabran, ne bi bilo ovog rata u Ukrajini. To je apsolutno tačno. I zato je bilo važno pokrasti Trumpa. Ovo što je rekao gospodin Glišić, to je bila operacija duboke države, bukvalno obojna revolucija tamo. Oni su se čak posle time i hvalili. Njima je bilo neophodno da bi se krenulo operaciju.
Ono što smo čuli u ovom drugom delu intervjua Scotta Rittera jeste u stvari taj odnos snaga eventualni NATO alijanse i vojske Ruske federacije i tu kulu od papira, u stvari on je govorio da NATO ako bi morao da mobiliše sve te vojnike, da to ne bi bilo uopšte onako kako je na papiru.
Pa to je evidentno, ja mislim da to jasno i iole trezvenim ljudima u Nemačkoj, Italiji, Americi, Britaniji, bez da promene svoj ušuškani način života, da se to istumba tako kako se mnogima tamo ne bi svidjelo, oni zaista ne mogu da zaraste ni sa nekom malom beznačajnom zemljom. Inače, ne znam da li McGregor ili Scott Ritter, mislim Scott Ritter tvrde da kad bi se sad vodio rat za Falklandska ostrva između Argentine i Britanije, da bi Argentina pobedila ubedljivo Britaniju. Znači ta Britanija koja je držala otprilike odmah iza rata skoro onoliko vojnika koliko sad ima ukupno na teritoriji zapadne Nemačke. To je zaista, kako kaže Ritter, tigar od papira. On je to rekao za NATO u celini, ali to je zaista tigar od papira.